guess we can get started. We got a lot to cover. We got a lot I want to hear. We want to hear from all of you. So let's get right into it. All right. We are the Cooperative Assembly of Cascadia. We're a local Seattle based group committed to direct democracy at the smallest levels of community. It is our goal to help communities organize themselves with their neighbors to make decisions for themselves. As, as people of a community, no one knows what you and your neighbors know or need and how to meet those needs better than you, yourselves. We're asking for you and your neighbors to pull together and decide for yourselves how you can build a community that works for everyone living in it. Now, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. Please refrain from any charged or incriminating language or hate speech. Please be aware that this conversation is going to be recorded and shared with other friends of the movement. So if you do not wish to be recorded, you can disable your video and then also edit your display name to an alias if you'd like. Also, while you're editing your name, please edit your Zoom name with your pronouns so we know what to address you by. When the talk is open for questions, you can add yourself to the queue on Stack to have a turn to speak. You do that by typing just the capital S in the Zoom chat, and the Stack facilitator for this Zoom session will call on you. If you have a direct response to something that somebody said, you can type DR in the chat, just like Dr. DR. All right. And with that, I guess we'll get into the overview of this whole session here. So first, we're going to have some introductions, just talk about who we are. We're also going to go right into some scenarios to talk about kind of how these ideas would play in two situations of varying degrees of problems, I guess is the way to describe it. And then we're going to go right into a group discussion. That is the main show. We want to talk with all of you, talk about these ideas, and then from there we want to see how to get everyone involved within this kind of project and this broader movement. And then we're going to talk about a vision for a local confederation of assemblies and kind of what a confederation, because all of us probably don't live in the same place, and how we can work together to make this thing be one cool, cohesive unit. And then we'll go right into questions, and that'll be it. So if you have any questions, do save them for the end, or if you have questions, you can also probably ask them in the group discussion too. There'll be plenty of time to ask questions, and we want to have plenty of space open for those questions to be asked and addressed. All right, so we'll get into the introductions. I already introduced the group, but first I'll introduce myself. My name's Nate. My pronouns are he, him. If anybody else in the CAC would like to introduce themselves, they're more than welcome to. I am not the only one at the CAC. This is not one person behind a computer running the show.
What's up? This is Joyful. My pronouns are she, they, or he. Bouncing on over to another comrade.
Hi, my name's Em. Pronouns are she, they. Member of the CAC. I'll send it over to another comrade.
My name's Fern, they, them. Nice to see everyone.
My name's Dan, he, him. Also, good to see everyone.
My name's Omar, he, him.
We'll go right into the scenarios. All right, so scenario number 1. This is going to be as a slight preface. These scenarios are not a literal guide for Confederation. They're just a possible way to think through problems on a more directly democratic scale. So keep that in mind as we're going through these. So, scenario number 1. Shahid lives on a residential street in White Center. And when he leaves for work in the early morning, he lets his dog stay outside. Shahid's dog is very agitated by neighbors or cars and barks continuously for more than an hour after Shahid leaves. Shahid's neighbor, Steve, has to work late shifts and frequently finds himself unable to sleep because of the continued barking. Steve is getting more and more frustrated with the situation. Shahid's first language is not English, and so rather than talking together, Steve calls 911 to report noise complaints due to the barking. Now, how would this situation be handled within our current organization of society? Well, for Shahid, who is from Iran and ethnically Persian, there's a chance that when the police show up to his door, the interaction results in nothing more than a warning. There's also a very real possibility that the situation could escalate where either Shahid or his dog could be shot by the police. Now, that doesn't sound very good. But if we say we were existing in your neighborhood that had a neighborhood assembly and was different, entirely organized entirely differently, how would that look? Well, in Shahid and Steve's neighborhood, there is a monthly general assembly where everyone is welcome and encouraged to participate. This is what we call direct democracy. At the assembly, Steve puts community noise protocols on the agenda. During his speaking time, he brings up his concerns with Shahid's dog and explains that his sleep and mental health have taken a dip due to insomnia. Steve isn't the only one who mentions noise, as other people are concerned about loud power tools, late parties, dogs, roosters. There's a lot of things going on in White Center. The neighborhood assembly decides to facilitate a dialogue between Steve, Shahid, and their other neighbors. They employ good facilitators and translators to help this conversation run smoothly. The assembly concludes through consensus to noise regulations for the mental and physical health of the neighbors. Steve realized that he'd misplaced his anger at Shahid, and the two later decide to have a joint family dinner. Boom. And they shake hands. Things are cool. Everything is gravy in the White Center Neighborhood Assembly. Now, again, think of these are just potential situations that a neighborhood assembly could solve. This isn't a be-all, end-all. Just talking about these ideas to maybe get your brain churning and think about ideas in your own neighborhood. Now, scenario 2 is a bit bigger issue. 2 years into the future, a magnitude 9.1 earthquake hits the city of Seattle. All of the supply lines for resources such as food, water, and shelter become incredibly strained. Tensions are running very high and relief is stretched thin. Markets and some small community farms are burglarized, and violence breaks out in some areas where water is the most contaminated or scarce. Now, how would we see this handled within our current system? To address resource shortages and clashes over food and water, there is a major deployment of the National Guard, and the region is essentially put under martial law. People stealing food to feed their families are ruthlessly beaten, imprisoned, and some are murdered. Wealthy and powerful individuals are specifically protected, while those without resources are forced to live on a stringent diet of rations. As the state and city rebuild infrastructure, massive austerity measures are implemented to cover budget shortfalls through the straining of resources. Much of the water sources were contaminated as sewage and gas pipelines broke during the earthquake. Clean water is no longer a fully public utility, but rather an expensive commodity. Many people now pay up to 30% of their household income on fresh water and live in dilapidated houses still very much in need of repairs. Sounds kind of doomer. Sounds kind of bleak. Well, fortunately, the people that live in your neighborhood, I'm talking you, all the people out there, they had a major vote through their communal assemblies on food sovereignty in January 2021. It happened. I can't even believe none of you even heard about it yet. Through unanimous consent of the assemblies, they provided tools, seeds, volunteer labor, and funds for anyone who wanted to grow food on their property, in local parks or on vacant and abandoned lots nearby. This also included community funding and installation of water collection tanks that catch rainwater. The assemblies had done such an unbelievable job transforming their landscape into a fertile urban agricultural hub over the past year that they even had excess food. The assemblies convened immediately to facilitate mutual aid, such as search and rescue, emergency medical clinics, and delivery of rations to neighbors whose crops had been lost from the quake or secondary pollution. Once the people of Seattle saw how others across the city were in violent situations fighting for water and resources, they decided to send deliveries of excess food and water to other assemblies to distribute to their neighborhoods. Sounds pretty cool. I don't know about you. Sounds like a pretty fun time considering the current conditions. Now, with those two scenarios boiling around in your head, we're going to go right into discussions of problems in Cascadia and beyond, because I assume it's not the only people in this call are from the area. So now we're going to do what, albeit a Zoom version of a People's Assembly. So I'm going to blather on for just a tiny bit more, and then I want to hear what everybody has to say. So we're going to talk about the specific problems and how this will kind of be organized. So first, we're going to formulate a specific problem and agreeing on just one for today. With everything that we talked about, we'll now convene into this assembly and discuss a single problem that affects your neighborhood. You'll need to decide on one problem to solve with your neighbors on this call. These solutions should not be forming policy within the existing governmental structures or making businesses or forming nonprofits, but are things that neighbors can do together with their collective skills and resources. Then, we'll brainstorm solutions. After identifying and deciding on the chosen problem the group wants to focus on, we'll next brainstorm potential solutions for the chosen problem. Then we will synthesize solutions. After we've brainstormed our solutions, we'll work together and we'll make one giant cooking pot of everybody's solutions that makes everybody happy, and reaches consensus agreement amongst our group. And then finally, we'll have a proposal formation. With the synthesized solution reached, a proposal of the solution will be created to be presented to the larger group. We are all in the larger group, so that's okay. We'll all know what our solution is. Forming a proposal, I guess, before very last thing, I promise. Based on the discussion that we're going to have with the problem, of our chosen problem, a proposal is verbalized that synthesizes the ideas presented. The next step is someone seconds the proposal. All you have to do is say, I second the proposal. The group then writes down the proposal to check if it needs to be amended and make sure it completely communicates the idea. For this Zoom version, we'll just type it in the chat so that everybody can see it. And if anybody has an amendment they would like to put forth for the chosen proposal, you just hop in the chat, put in the DR in the chat box, and we can talk about it. Then, once everything's been amended, all the people are good with the chosen amendments, everyone in the group is asked if they agree or they consent to the written up proposal. We'll just go one by one around the room. And then the proposal is then voted on by the group in order to be implemented. Excellent. There will be just 4 roles for this group. There's going to be the stack, person's on stack. There'll be the person to take notes, because there'll probably be a lot of ideas floating around, and we want to be able to make sure we remember all of them. And then we're going to have a facilitator, and then finally we're just going to have a spokesperson that reads off the final proposal. And then, folks, we have done the first assembly. So with that, I hand it off to our discussion facilitator.
All right, thank you, Nate. You did such a good job. Much appreciated. Thanks again, everyone, so much for being here. So in this group discussion, we, like Nate said, we are going to kind of just brainstorm a couple things that we've noticed in our areas, or, you know, our if some of you aren't here in the Pacific Northwest Cascadia area, some issues that you see in your immediate neighborhood, place where you live. Once again, if you do want to speak, make sure that you put an S in the chat, and our stack facilitator will call on you in the order that you put the S in. And then if you have a direct response to someone, something that someone said, you can put a DR in the chat for direct response. And then we will check in with the people who are on stack ahead of you and make sure it's okay that they give you space to respond. Okay, so if there is anyone who wants to kick off this group discussion, again, don't feel pressured that to speak if you don't feel like it. But this is a chance and a good place for everyone to kind of vocalize what they see. And it is kind of weird and awkward the first time you do it, but it gets easier the more you do it. And that's why we're here to practice. So I see I have a couple people on stack. I have Joyful, and then it will go to Lev. So Joyful, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think one thing I've noticed in my neighborhood and on the Zoom call is Nazis showing up and trying to disrupt shit, and putting up stickers and just being fucking pieces of shit. So I think that's, for me, is a thing that I think we really need to fuck up these stupid fucking Nazis. Lev, it's on you, homie.
Thanks for that. I actually kind of agree. That was a really good point. Kind of maybe in a similar vein, I've noticed that around me, the Seattle Department of Transportation seems to be destroying my artwork and putting up stickers about reporting vandalism. And my understanding of the law here in Seattle is that we are specifically allowed to post bills on SDOT signage. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both for sharing. We do have an open stack if anybody wants to jump in, or we can discuss these two topics that have just come forward. Omar is on stack. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know with like COVID, I was in a band and I plan on being in a band again. And to be socially distant, we've been playing outside, but I don't want to disrupt anyone or like cause too much noise that might bother the neighbors. So I feel like some kind of like neighborhood assembly system would help find a time when it would be when like playing music outside would be like most convenient for everyone else.
Thanks, Omar. Yeah, it sounds like we're sort of talking about a couple of things here. Is like being respectful of our neighbors, and figuring out with our neighbors like how we can do that, and then also like I heard Lev talking about like graffiti and posting bills and being able to have like the free expression, and then there's also concern about like fascists and Nazis trying to fuck up our movements. Anybody else got anything else they got to add? Marina, go ahead.
I think that these are all some very common problems that I feel like people are having. I mean, in regards to living in a system that is dominated by powers of authority, and then backed up and also simultaneously backing up right-wing agents, which is really, really difficult to kind of live in that atmosphere. But then also, the Omar with his band is great, because that consideration is something that we saw in the first scenario, is that having that consideration will help stop involving those forces of power to come in and exert whatever force or pressure that they are allowed to use from the state. So I think that these are all kind of connected. The protection of Lev's artwork, I think, is a very important step, especially if it's coming from someone who is not a right winger and not a fascist, because, like Joyful mentioned, that there are fascists that are posting propaganda, and then that's the kind of stuff that we are seeing. So I would definitely encourage Lev to, keep doing it unless they can find you. Maybe there is like a brigade that you can start, like an art brigade, get in contact with other artists to do some kind of protests that you can bring it up and find in a neighborhood assembly, find other artists in your neighborhood. That would be really good. I think that in that situation too, you might also find yourself coming toe to toe with the opposite party of those right wingers who are also posting propaganda and stuff, and that can lead to at least a good face to face and trying to identify them and figure out like where they are in the neighborhood, and then be able to keep a watch out for everyone and know who they are, because they do like to hide their identities behind like they like to hide, of course, and it is dangerous for them to be known as Nazis, and so we definitely can be safer by knowing who is who in our neighborhood. Yeah, and we have an open stack.
And if anybody has like thoughts about other ways that we can tackle some of the problems pointed out here too, please feel free to jump on stack.
Looks like we've got Robert on stack.
Hey, hello guys. Hey, thanks. Some really important stuff being said here, and I'm just grateful to know that you guys exist to start. And I wanted to respond to it's sort of a direct response, but to finding our opposition around us. And when we talk about these things, I find it helpful to keep a real class consciousness about that, in the sense of, I I was fortunate enough to be in Portland and Seattle for this last year, and we all learn, and I think every protest that I participated in teaches me something, and we all grow and learn. But I found I'm starting to wonder if there isn't a sort of an agenda from somewhere that's not from us or from the people, to start some sort of poor on poor conflict, while sort of the billionaires continue to go to the bank. And I, particularly in places like Seattle, where there are, huge, where there are billionaires and, horrendous amounts of hoarded capital from around the world manifest in very small numbers of hands in a place like Seattle. That we focus on that. And that's really all. So when we look around and see people in our neighbors, let's remember that most people get that way through some sort of propaganda and deception. And as we all know, we're heavily indoctrinated in this country in all sorts of nefarious ways. And while it's important to not let things go unchecked, it's also important to remember the larger enemy, maybe not the larger enemy, but maybe the captain of our enemies, I guess you could say. And thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Robert. Nate has a direct response.
Hey, Robert. One, thanks for hopping and talking. It's good to hear your voice. And yeah, I think that that is probably like one of the larger overarching issues is like, I guess what it boils down to at the very end of the day is humans versus capital, and the accumulation of it and the way it affects our lives in very negative ways. And at the the same time, there are people that are propagandized to think that uh, being mean to other people and exploitative and misogynist and generally just like anti-human being, as it were. They think that's like cool or fun. As we saw at the beginning of this call, they thought somebody could just hop on, start drawing things. It's not even worth acknowledging. But I think the idea, like, capital will always use sort of, or at least those with the capital, as we saw, like Bezos or whatever was working with the Pentagon or whatever for facial recognition software. Like these people clearly have a side, and as we've seen through history, as we live in capitalism, people can be very easy to pay off. Some people don't want to say it, but people do have a price tag sometimes. And if that means being reactionary, or if that means you've been at the protest too, like these people that shoot at other people with tear gas and murder people in the streets, they have a side, and they have the side, and that side is of capital. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, and it's important to try to find ways that do de-radicalize these people. And I think that's something to think about and ponder about. I don't know if I necessarily have the answer to that, but maybe that's something we can talk about in this group. Fern?
Yeah, and I think, that's why building neighborhood assemblies is so important. Like, obviously those are the issues, but what are we going to do about it? Like, their force is much larger than we are alone as individuals. So we need as many people as we can to not only join in an effort to combat those forces, but also to form new ways of being and alternative ways of being in the world. And that can mean many things. It can mean, even confronting hierarchy itself in our own selves and with our neighbors, and also not relying on, these systems of domination as much as we are forced to now. What does it look like to do mutual aid in your neighborhood to a point where people are relying more on each other than they are on these systems of domination? How can we form this alternative here and now? And I think that through neighborhood assemblies and through confederated assemblies especially, that's how you do it. You start talking to your neighbors, you start talking to your friends and whoever you can about these things, and start having discussions with everyday people. They don't have to be leftist or some specific ideology. They can just be the neighbor that you have that may be heavily conditioned, like we all are, to be a sort of competitive or non-cooperative person. But the more you talk to these people and the more you build these relationships with them, it starts breaking that down. You could overthrow capitalism tomorrow and we'd still be faced with hierarchy and domination. And what would happen is we would just form other forms of hierarchy and domination, as you've seen with mostly every revolution in the past, because that is not being confronted, but it can be confronted through interactions with your neighbors and your community, and start dissolving this conditioning that we've been faced with, and that's why I think that this stuff is so important. And there is no answer, but there is an answer together. I think we all have good ideas that we can offer, and come to a consensus together of, like, how do we how do we help each other? How do we go further and form alternatives and make our lives better? You know, because we don't have to live like this. We don't have to be in the hell world that we're in right now. It doesn't. This is not necessary, and but it is necessary that we talk to each other and we start formulating these alternatives.
Thank you so much, Fern. We have an open stack. Again, it sounds kind of like we are identifying a, however large problem, but I think it's a problem that we all are currently having to deal with and live under, from the very lower levels of, dealing with fascists in your neighborhood, or, the powers in your city, like the transportation authority, to the actual bigger picture of, like, who is actually in, behind all this, which is the capital class, the money class, and how we can kind of build another system of power that can be just as strong, and has the potential to provide for us what we need through each other, and being there for each other, and being supportive by just getting together and talking in a world that works really, really hard to keep us separated. So I would think that we can probably stay on this topic. It sounds like it has a lot of feedback coming to it. Or if somebody else has another problem that they find very prevalent in their neighborhood, or their city where they live, definitely invite you to jump in. And we have Joyful on stack.
Yeah, I just want to sort of also kind of affirm this idea of building alternatives to capitalism in the state. Like, we can be out in the street constantly, like, opposing all of these unjust hierarchies, or even like tearing down, like, evil institutions. But at the same time, it's kind of meaningless if we're not also alternatively building like counter hegemonic institutions, or like dual power, that we can then sort of like roll into, like, our new imagined society. And I think that's why we think this is important today, is to do this just kind of like brief introduction into neighborhood assemblies. And so, yeah, I just also want to see, like, maybe if there's other ways that people think they could do, like, maybe in their neighborhoods, to address some of the issues brought forth. And I think some of it is a bit of a method. A neighborhood assembly is not the answer. It is kind of almost a question. It's like, then we come to the neighborhood assembly, and it's not prescriptive. Like, we just do we really, like, do the method, and we figure out together, through consensus, how to address problems. And I think right now, what I think the hope is to try and pick a problem, and then to sort of like formulate some ideas around it, and then kind of like come up with a proposal, just to show people how it might look in an organized assembly or organized society. So yeah, I'm just wondering if there's like a singular problem that we might want to sort of rally around. There was quite a few that were brought up, but there's a couple that I think maybe have some potential for us to kind of brainstorm some solutions around it. Fern, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, the one that was less broad, um, and less questioning the systems at large, was more around the lines of was the art. That's something that you can start doing something now, with your neighbors. Let's say your neighbors, were the ones that they brought up the concern about art or something like that, and then you were like, oh, then we have a discussion about it and how we can meet in the middle of, like, or not even in the middle, but how we can find a consensus of how art is put up in the area, that works for everyone, or works, for people that consent to with whatever way it works. But obviously in this case, it was the state keeps taking it down. But it's like, okay, well then, what do we do to um, change that? Like, how can we still put up this art and not get it taken down by the state? Or how do we, how do we do that? I think this is like the most realistic topic, something that you can address now, and start working towards, I mean, when you're talking about overthrowing capitalism or something, like, there's a million things that can come from that, and but they aren't necessarily things we can do without, first building that like strong community. So I think with these smaller things like the art, that's where you start building the community. You start building these relationships that then can form alternatives and attack the system at the same time. But yeah, that's where I think it should go personally.
Joyful is on stack.
Yeah, I second that, Fern. And I think maybe one idea I had off the top of my head was, we're not trying to legislate our way to liberation, but there are occasionally times where we can, like have for example, something at the city level, so it doesn't make it illegal, or it doesn't make it so that, I don't know if it's the parks department or whoever is taking down art or defacing it or putting up, signs and stuff. But like sort of changing those laws so that way people can be expressive and can spread ideas that are, conducive to building a left libertarian society. Lev.
Yeah, I think everyone so far has made great points. I guess just from what I've seen here, in the immediate area of Cal Anderson, and both from my time at Occupy, I guess is what do we do when those sort of, for instance, I feel the city law is already on our side regarding this posting of signage. It's interesting to note when that is the case, and yet the police and the state are clearly against it, for their own opinions that just disagree with what the laws are. And that's kind of interesting, where we saw this in Occupy, where a judge sort of ruled that we had the right to be in Zuccotti Park. And just conveniently, when that happened, the police went away and didn't enforce it anymore. It just happened to be private security stepped in, and they hired all of the off-duty officers to be part of that private security firm. So it was, I guess, just interesting to note that. And I guess, my questions are, why are we so hesitant to maybe form our own private security groups, or make nonprofits? Or I think I heard some discussion around there, and I'd like to know why we are hesitant to form those sort of organizations.
Fern has a direct response.
Yeah, I think there are forms of that are worth getting into, but being very much different than their forms of security. Their forms of security are of domination. You know, they just want to enforce their laws on us and on the people. And that, I don't think that by forming some like left version of that is not a good idea. um, but doing something that is in self-defense, though, for sure, of those forces. Now that's another case altogether. Um, you know, there's a big difference in enforcement and self-defense. So I could see, you know, like what you're saying here, like what if there was art put up and you talk to your neighbors and stuff and it was like they like the art and they're like, yeah, it's bullshit that this is getting taken down. And then what if they were like, well, let's do like art watches or something where we'll watch for these enforcers coming and taking it down, you know, so then we can maybe confront them and make it just a hassle for them to even come and take it down. Like they won't even be worth it anymore. They'll be like, every time we go take this down, we're confronted by all the neighbors and like it's too much to deal with, you know, like it kind of like just sucks all their time up. And as we saw, that does affect them a lot when you start sucking their time up, and they start getting worn down and quitting their jobs or leaving, and which is beautiful. But yeah, like something like that. That's what I see as a sort of a solution to this. Like just like neighbor awareness of when the art's being taken down and how we can, how people can, you know, confront whoever it is that's taking it down.
I see that we did have a direct response, but Joyful rescinded their direct response. And then so on Stack, we have Aiden and then Jessica. And then I think we could probably go for about 10 minutes more on this discussion, and then we will work on wrapping up the webinar. Aiden, go ahead.
Now am I unmuted?
You are, Aiden.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Sorry. I wanted to add with regards to what Lev asked. When the phrase nonprofit was used earlier, when we said we're not here to promote nonprofit, that was specifically referring to what we might call nonprofit with a capital N, with a specific, you know, tax exempt structure and bureaucracy that tends to exist under the way it's often done, not referring to any organization that is neither government nor for-profit business, because community groups, yes, it just depends on how they're done and carefully.
Great, we have Jessica on Stack.
Hey, so this might be more of a direct response to Fern and Lev, but I did some research. I know there's a place in San Francisco called Clarion Alley. You guys might have heard of it. It's like a street dedicated to murals, and I tried to look into like the legality of it because I know it's more of a tourist destination now, but it seems that there is a group behind it called the Clarion Alley Mural Project, and they're like a grassroots artist run organization, and they like basically take care of Clarion Alley. And I just might, you know, like maybe we can what's it called, it might be like a different way of like quote unquote like enforcing the keeping our art up as like a community project of like artists, I guess, and like concerned community members. So that's all I wanted to say.
Great, yeah, that's great information, which I don't think any of us had ever heard of before. which just goes to show the benefit of neighborhood assemblies when you have the crowd wisdom and all of the good ideas that can come up to be synthesized. Joyful has a direct response, and Fern as well. And then I think from there, if everybody's feeling okay, we might be able to maybe try to start forming a proposal to as as this assembly to how we would tackle this Love's problem. So Joyful, go ahead.
Sure. And I think our sort of reservation about forming nonprofits or small businesses or like trying to form political parties is that, for example, this neighborhood assembly movement was attempted 4 years ago in the form of the neighborhood action coalitions here in Seattle. And that shit was co-opted pretty quickly by the liberals, who then started just unilaterally running candidates and sponsoring candidates and forums, and very much pulled it to the right pretty quickly. And so I think the concern is, if we don't have a strong base, then and people that are educated about this stuff and are sort of like on the same page, then it is easier for the right to take the movement and absorb it into theirs. And it's just sort of like their constant need for hegemony. To respond to what Jessica just said, I really fucking love that idea. I also think that our society has a weak spot, or it's for the kind of a crack in the wall per se, is where there's private property is involved. And I think communalizing property, or certain areas that are communal and not private, and not maybe even set aside for things like murals or leftist art, could be like a really fucking sick way to kind of put stuff out there. And even people that aren't like mad radical I think have been getting radicalized from things like the George Floyd uprising, and seeing like ACAB and like lots of different like kind of like black martyrs. And I think that it's slowly like getting people to understand. And I really like that idea a lot as as a potential. I think that it could be a big undertaking, but it also could have some really great rewards. And beauty is part of what makes what life worth living, and aesthetics and stuff. So like I think that would be like a pretty cool way to sort of address as a neighborhood how we can keep our city beautiful, and also maybe keep it from weirdo fascists from painting swastikas or like stuff that we don't really want to see in our city too. Fern?
Yeah, it's a pretty cool idea. I think of other places, like the Olympia Free Wall, where anyone can go paint anything. And there's a giant ACAB there that's been there forever, and or not forever, but for a few years. And it's just a giant billboard, basically, that to remind you that of the injustice that the system is inherent in the system and inherent in their jobs. So lots of good things can come from that. It is kind of like saying, hey, if you're going to do a thing, go do it over there, which for some artists, the reason that they're putting their art up on private property is to also show that private property isn't real, and that like that it isn't, that it can be confronted in different ways, and putting art up on certain things is a form of that expression, I think. But I do see lots of good things coming from things like the Free Wall, or like in the South Park neighborhood in Seattle, there's the River City skate park, and you can go graffiti whatever the hell you want in there. And there's some beautiful stuff that comes out of it. There's some cool messages that come out of it. And the community is like really into it because art's friggin' it's beautiful. So I mean, who hates art? Those people are crazy. Whatever. But yeah, I kind of like this idea. Maybe it could be a decent solve, at least, or a decent place for people to express themselves through art without worrying about it getting taken down or being harassed or whatever. And they can go do their art in other ways too, in other places if they want to. But this is a place that they can go and just like have all those worries gone, at least in that space, and then from there do whatever they feel like doing as an artist. But yeah, I think this is a good idea. I would second that idea.
Okay, so it kind of sounds like we are getting closer to a proposal-ish. Going through the notes that I've been taking, it sounds like based off the example of the Clarion Alley in San Francisco and the Olympia free wall, that maybe like if we were all in a neighborhood, hypothetically, and Lev was one of our neighbors and they came around and were like, hey, I'm an artist and I really want to do this art piece in our neighborhood. Um, is that okay? Like, are you, would you be willing to help protect it from, the police who want to come and mark it as vandalism? And can you like vouch for me that it's not vandalism, that it's actually like a community project? And there's some other artists too who live in the neighborhood who are like, oh yeah, like let's do something together. Let's collaborate on a mural. And then after that's done, in order a way to protect it and make it property of the collective, our collective neighborhood, what would be a proposal we think that we can lay down that is like, this is our intention, and then this is how we're going to make it real. Fern is on stack.
I'm sorry to talk so much. It's just, but if anyone else has anything, please go ahead. But I, I don't really want to pander to the state to give us concessions. I don't want them. I don't want to beg them for anything. I think we just take what is ours in the first place, and we do it with our neighbors so that we can feel more empowered. It is so demoralizing to beg the state to give us a wall. That's bullshit. Like, I don't want to do that. That's not empowering at all. That's just begging and begging and then giving you concessions. I think that we could find places that are into the idea though, like the free wall in Olympia is because I forget what building it's on, but I think they're cool with it. They're like, yeah, like the free wall's dope and fucking paint that shit, And so you just, instead of getting concessions from the state, you can find places or you can make places. Like, let's say you mix those two ideas together that we were having, like you find an alley or something. This is hypothetical. And you start putting up art in there. And then there's people that watch out for that alley, and they're like, make sure that people don't go in there and try to paint over it or whatever, and they hold it down. And in some way, it's like an art occupation, I guess, in some ways. And then, that's sending a message that we want art. We want to be able to express our art in a space that's safe for us. And of course, it wouldn't be safe at first because you'd be protecting it, but a lot of times, eventually, those things will become kind of a permanent space or whatever. And especially if you're making relationships with the businesses, of course, that's a concession as well, I guess. But those people are your neighbors that work there. The workers are your neighbors. And you could be building even more neighbor power by building a relationship with them, with the people who work there, that you're painting on their walls, so that's my thoughts on it.
Joyful.
Yeah, so I have a proposal, kind of synthesizing the things that people have said here thus far. Of this might actually be something in a neighborhood that's organized, of having like a separate, working group. But I guess the proposal would be to find, amenable public spaces that we can all agree to, that will defend. And I think, like in Capitol Hill, for example, there's that backside of that building that near the fountain, that has become just sort of this really beautiful art space that people are painting murals on there. And then I also think reaching out to some of the building owners and getting permission. And I think it could make a really interesting a division between the police and the state. I mean, the police and business, because the police are sort of beholden to private property. And so I think that would be the proposal, is kind of a twofold, to for the working group to explore um, public property that we will then just sort of like defend, and sort of like create a space that can be beautiful for everyone. And then number two is finding private property where people would allow us to, as our neighborhood assembly, to paint murals, and sort of like build some power and kind of drive a wedge between the police, or the state, and our assembly, and kind of build that dual power, that separation, so it's not co-opted by the state. I'm actually not going to type this out because it's kind of complex.
I got a summary. I'm going to put it in the chat for you.
Okay. And then just we're talking about doing another webinar about consensus and kind of group decision making, because we've been studying this for a few years. One thing that sounds weird about consensus is it makes you assume that everybody has to consent to a thing, which is not necessarily true. It's more about us, like, people have the opportunity to assent or like give their voice, but as long as it doesn't violate core principles or values or points of unity or whatever people want to call it, then the people that are not, like, it doesn't set their soul on fire, then it's a thing that they would probably be like, I'm a stand aside, or with a small tweak of the proposal to be more in line with our like an amendment, to be in line with our principles, then I would be fully committed to this. But the blocks really should only happen when it's clear violation of principles. And so we're going to just Marina will, or M will probably put us through the consent process, just as an example. But just to clarify, like, what consensus actually means, it doesn't mean that everybody agrees to every single decision that the far right wants to act like we would, but it means that people have the opportunity to voice concerns and block things that are unsafe for the community, or going to actually like be against core principles. So yeah, go ahead, M or Fern.
Yeah, and I think, in this context, we don't have principles for this assembly, obviously. We haven't developed these principles. So it could go a bit awry here because we don't have principles. But I think it is necessary that if you are going to do consensus decision making with more than just a group of friends or something, like a larger group of people, that you need, it is necessary that you have core principles that you can fall back on, because otherwise there will be a tyranny of structurelessness, and people will just block whatever they want whenever they want, and that can happen, because they can just be like, oh, I don't like blue, so I'm going to block this. Where if you have principles in line and set that you've all agreed on, this isn't principles somebody's enforced on you, but everyone's agreeing on, and it can fluctuate throughout membership and stuff. But that they would have to refer back to those principles in order to block, like, well, what principle is it breaking? So if it is, okay, that's a legit block. But otherwise, just because you don't like blue doesn't mean you can block it. It's like, you can have an amendment. Can we make it more blue than it is now, or something, or add some blue? And then that would then kind of change the original proposal. So just to like keep that in mind as we do this as well.
Okay, so we do have a proposal put in the chat, which reads for everybody to be able to read and hear it. It says, find amenable public spaces that we will all agree to defend and create a space that can be beautiful for everyone. Finding private properties and getting permission, which has the potential to get private businesses more on our side. And if anybody here in the chat or in the webinar has anything that they want to amend, add to it, or anything that any language that they feel it needs to be tweaked or changed, please go ahead and jump in on the stack. But if we don't have any immediate objections, we can go around, and if you want to put a thumbs up in the chat, then that will show that we have support from everybody for it. Or you can say it as well. It looks like we have seconds from Joyful, Lev, and Jessica so far. Nate. Joyful has an amendment which says beautiful for everyone, specifically through murals. Oh, if you can't do the thumbs up icon, you can also just put the number 2, like second as well, and that shows that you'll second it. Sorry about that, Omar. It looks like we got a lot of thumbs up. So Joyful's amendment is beautiful for everyone, specifically through murals. Okay, so let me just change. Now, this part of the process is where you just slightly change the language and then you retype it out and then reread it. So now,
Yeah, I threw that in there because I thought it could sound like we're talking about like planting trees or grass or
yeah,
beautifying sidewalks or something, and it could get kind of NIMBY-ish. So I was just adding some specificity to it.
Okay, so now the proposal reads, find amenable public spaces that we will all agree to defend and create a space that can be beautiful for everyone, specifically through murals, finding private properties and getting permission, which has the potential to get private businesses more on our side. So if everyone is happy with that, we can do a round of second. I will second it. We have a second from Dan, from Joyful, Nate, from Lev, Fern second, Omar second. And Anand second. Okay, Jessica second. And I think we're missing O'Connor second. Great. We're missing a second from Aiden, R, Toast, Keaton, and Sandy. Sandy is a second. Okay, great. And our other, yes, we have a second from Aiden. Okay. And our other friends who are listening might not be able to interact for some reason.
Are there any blocks, y'all?
Yeah, does anybody have any objections? Okay, well, it sounds like we have reached group consensus, which is very exciting. And so now in this part of the process, the proposal is now an action item for the neighborhood. And then from this point, you would move on and figure out exactly how you're going to tackle this and how you're going to make this proposal now a reality. So good job, everybody. That was a great discussion. And now I'm going to turn it on over to Nate to wrap up our webinar and kind of take us out. Play us out, Nate.
Thank you, Em. Facilitated as solidly as always. So I guess I have just a little bit more to say. As if I didn't speak enough today. But I have my It's my lead singer syndrome. I love to hear myself speak, but I'm not a lead singer. So we're going to talk just a little bit more about what a more broader vision for Confederation would look like. As you saw, but just within this like small amount of time, there's a lot going on. And so when you're in your own little neighborhood doing all the work that needs to be done within those neighborhoods, it's gonna be, can be kind of hectic. So think about what this vision for your confederation of assemblies would look like. Um, First off, this is more of a politics at a human scale. Um, Say, if you look at a map already organized by the state, not like we're condoning action of the state here, but think of the idea of a precinct map. Precincts are an example conceptualized by the city, of course. Again, not don't have to follow this, but it is just one of the ways in which we can bring political engagement into our everyday lives and kind of divide areas in order to come up with smaller assemblies. This idea of face-to-face democracy, which we've just participated in, between neighbors to solve problems, build lasting relationships, and collective decisions. This is also a self-perpetuating model. I know we spoke about kind of the ideas of like nonprofits and stuff, but this isn't something that will just be relegated to one thing and then it just kind of exists on its own. This is supposed to be something that grows outward. That is how this whole project succeeds, is that it expands outward and becomes a self-perpetuating model. The organized precincts work with us, the CAC, or not, but it's just the idea to teach neighboring precincts this model and help them organize, building solidarity and relationships at the same time. And if people are asking, probably should have clarified this at the beginning, the idea of confederation. Doesn't mean the southern slave states in the Civil War. Means something entirely different. Confederation is needed so precincts can cooperate and coordinate on issues that require a larger or wider scale of attention, such as the environment, collective defense, organizing communities, and mutual aid. These are usually issues cited as a main need for government and authority of the conventional institutions. But by making decisions at the most local level possible, this takes back control for communities and allows real solutions. It's kind of cool, kind of awesome. With that, can you imagine in just what hang on. Can you imagine what we could accomplish with a directly democratic assembly in your neighborhood? Can you imagine the collective power in a confederation of these assemblies? I know we only had probably less than an hour of a confederation, and we already have something really cool and beautiful coming together. And that's the power that we all have and need to rebuild within each other, within ourselves, and our neighborhood in order to make a more hospitable planet and hospitable life for all of us. So, for our neighbors on this call, can you commit to continue participating and building this project? Say, Jessica, I really liked what you had to say. Can we count you in for helping out with this project and maybe helping it grow and becoming something super cool and being a bright, radiant light of sunlight in this cold and desolate world? Or how about Keaton? Can we count you in to help out? Or Lev, you had great ideas. I'm calling you all out because you know what? This only works if we're all doing it. So I guess with that, we're gonna hit the next slide. We're gonna post the QR code for how to sign up and get involved. Boom. So if you just scan that QR code, you should be able to get in. I will also post for those that do not have a QR code scanner. I can also post the link in the chat. In order to sign up for it. get you here. Sorry. There we go. So if you follow that link, you can sign up and we can get you involved and we can grow this cool little garden into a giant forest that takes over the entire planet, and infinite cool zone world starts and everything becomes cool forever. And so if you fill that out, we'll discuss further steps to organizing. But with that, enough of my blabbering. I want to hear what people have for questions. Let's open it up. Let's go. Let's see what you got. Show me what you got.
Go for it, Lev. Hit us with any questions you got, homie.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things I'm wondering for people who are sort of in between geographically between Portland and Seattle, what would you guys say your organization does differently than, forgive me if I'm conflating, organizations wrongly, but you seem similar to maybe Symbiosis PDX or Demand Utopia Portland. How would you differentiate your group than those, and I guess those in the broader Cascadian movement?
Joyful has a direct response.
Yeah, Symbiosis, we know the people that are behind that project, and they're very much situationists more than they are social ecologists. And so a lot of it is about like creating the spectacle and sort of pushing back against the state through the use of lots of imagery online, through like nondescript, bright masks and bright colors and flags and things like this. And so it sort of doesn't lend itself to the type of in-person direct democracy that we are wanting to build. Although we have much respect for situationists everywhere who are making spectacles. And we have, I think, another group who does the spectacle really well in our city is Socialist Alternative. They're not terribly well organized, but they will show up to events with hundreds of banners to hand out to people and then take photos, and it looks like they're really, really well organized, when in fact it's only like a handful of really committed people. And I think the situationism is super necessary, but in a lot of ways situationism cannot build the mass movements, because like the illusion of being organized is not the same thing as being actually organized. And so I think this is maybe where we differ from some of the tactics of our comrades. But there's also, this need for a diversity of tactics. There's the ones who can be very online and make it look like they're very organized. But then there's also the people that need to actually organize the movement. And you need kind of both of those. Like the situationists have brought a lot of, interest in social ecology and Bookchin's ideas and anarchism in general, and lots of these ideas. And personally, I would not be here without the situationists making the spectacles that they do. But at the same time, there's this sort of like ladder movement building that has to happen after people are aware of the ideas and actually making those a reality.
Fern?
Yeah, I think what differentiates us is that we're a decision-making group. We're finding ways of how people from different backgrounds, different ideologies, and under different conditions with different needs can make decisions together and come to consensus with those things and then implementing them. So that is like our sole focus is what is the best way that we can make decisions together. And we've implemented more than quite a few processes, that have worked for us. And that's not something we're going into in this meeting necessarily, but I think it is one that we are talking about sharing because it's well worth sharing. And aside from decision making, we're also a group that focuses a lot on accountability. I know that word's being thrown around a lot lately, but not being executed very well. It's just a word in a lot of ways, and no one's trying to like actually build real accountable models. And that is something that we very much are focused on. We've had many conflict resolutions. We've been faced with many different situations that all groups are faced with and that most groups dissolve from, but our group hasn't because we do have, I think, a very good accountability and conflict resolution model or something that we've all consented to and have all come together to build. We didn't have a blueprint. There was no like, we're just going to do it this way. We had deep, long discussions about all of these things. And my alarm's going off. And deep and long discussions about all these things to formulate our processes, and so far they've been extremely great. And I wouldn't be the person I am today without the processes that we have. And then that's another thing we do. We address hierarchies in ourselves and each other, very much so. And we're pretty radically transparent with each other, which most people can't do, and most groups can't handle. They'll dissolve. The conflict will just eat them to pieces, which happens a lot. So, not saying that that can't happen to us, but we have done a good job to now in facing that.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions? Or Lev, do you have any follow-up questions?
None for me, thanks.
Cool. Well, Nate, do you want to pull us through?
Can do, homie. Yeah, I guess that concludes today's class session of Direct Democracy through the Cooperative Assembly of Cascadia 101 class. But really, thanks for being here, everybody. This was a lot more people than I think we thought we were going to get, and so that's really good feeling. We've been working on this stuff for a really long time. The hatches have been shut at the CAC as we've been grinding away on this since just about quarantine started, and it's really been like a labor, not really, but like a labor of love. And we hope people are inspired by it and want to learn more. You can always reach out to us. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Fedbook, or whatever. And yeah, we're all over the place. We're everywhere, like fungal spores, baby. And we hope that spreads to everybody's neighborhood, and we make a cool new world. Again, as I said earlier, cool zone. One giant autonomous cool zone. So yeah, thanks for sticking around and listening to us ramble. We'll probably hang out for a little while longer if anybody just wants to banter, as it were. But other than that, I guess we are concluding today's session. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out, everybody. Let me not share my screen.